Okay, we are now recording.
Great,
And
terrific.
thank you, Jeff, for the reminder. Thank you, Erica, for the intro. Nice to see everyone joining. Thank you, and good to see some others kind of popping in as we get started. So as Erica mentioned, my name is Catherine Ahearn. I work as the head of content for the Knowledge Futures Group, predominantly focusing on PubPub, which is our open access, open source publishing platform. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for a few minutes, and then I'll, sorry, when you're the host, there are just so many more buttons. Okay. So everyone should be able to see this. So I've put together sort of a rough outline for the next hour. It's a little bit over detailed, but I'll be circulating this and sharing this and with all the links after this call. So I figured better to put more in there than less. So to start, I just want to go over a little bit about what PubPub is, why we're here talking about it, why you should care. So basically, PubPub is an open access publishing platform. It's started by the Knowledge Futures Group, which is now a nonprofit, but recently spun out of MIT. It was originally a group founded between the MIT Press and the MIT Media Lab. We build technology for the production, curation, and preservation of knowledge in service of the public good. What does that mean? Practically speaking, is that we stand up a few programs around, issues that we think are important in higher education and academia. And we also work directly with researchers and students in order to actually build open technology to help support healthier ecosystems. So for instance, our platform PubPub is entirely open source. Its roadmap is led by the researchers and the publishers and the editors and the conference organizers and the students who use it to publish. And we're committed to making sure that we are not purchased or privatized in any way, as has been the case with a lot of the learning tools and publishing tools recently. So we're committed to remaining community-led in that way. PubPub started at MIT. Let me see what my next link here is. Yeah, PubPub started at MIT as a project within the MIT Media Lab. Our executive director, Travis Rich, was a student there, was conducting research along with many of his peers that really didn't fit into the traditional publishing model. They were, not being given grants to do a specific thing that they can then go report on in a PDF that would publish in a journal. They were really working collaboratively, iteratively. A lot of it was, based on multimedia and different types of resources. So they first started PubPub just to share their research with each other and get feedback. And it wasn't long until Amy Brand, the director of the MIT Press, said, we're actually getting a lot of inquiries from our authors or prospective authors about wanting new, better ways to communicate their research, to publish their books, publish journals. And we think we might be able to team up with you to grow this into a platform that we can do that on, that's within MIT. So that's when I came aboard, and I helped, build this out further for books, predominantly first books. Now we have all different types of stuff on there, but until then, it was really just used internally for research labs at the Media Lab. And I'll get into more specific books, later on in the presentation. But I think right now I'd like to, to hand it off to Catherine and Lauren, who are the authors of Data Feminism. Whenever we talk about PubPub, it kind of always clicks for people when we actually dive into exact examples and talk about use cases. And so Lauren and Catherine will be talking about their book, Data Feminism, which went through an open review process on PubPub. After that, Jeff Ravel will be talking about his book that is published both in French and English on PubPub and uses some of our features that I think are really interesting. So I'll hand it over to you, Lauren and Catherine. I don't know if you guys want to share your screen or if you want me to drive here and show Data Feminism on my screen.
That might be terrific.
if you could show it.
I will do that.
Lauren, do you want to start and then I'll pop in when.
Sure, you're getting, I promised, cameos by my kids, so we're 1 out of 2 for now. Note that on your bingo card. So hey, Lo, I need to talk now, okay? So we were invited by Catherine and the PubPub team to put the draft of our book, Data Feminism, on PubPub for an open peer review. And at this point, I can't even remember. I mean, I think it was Catherine Ahearn, you should correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you came to us with that possibility, but it seemed so aligned with what we were trying to do. Other Catherine, she's over here in the grid. There's Catherine.
Hi, Loie. I'm the one who's waving. Hi. Nice sweatshirt.
Okay, here we're gonna have to. They're getting commandeered, but I think it was so aligned with the sort of what we wanted to do with the book, which was solicit as much feedback as we could from as many different perspectives as we could. The decision to put it online was a really easy one for us to make. And the TLDR version is that it worked amazingly. You know, I think another reason, well, there are a couple of, we have sort of a more of an intellectual sounding rationale for essentially what I just said, which I believe you can still read. But basically, you know, this was a book that took intersectional feminism as its sort of starting point. And one of the main tenets of intersectional feminism and feminism more generally is that, you know, sort of you get the best knowledge by bringing together multiple perspectives.
Do you have a virtual background?
Because there's a big mess behind me. Okay, Lo, you're gonna have to be quiet while I talk to the group, okay? Otherwise, I'm gonna have Catherine talk, okay? Can you be quiet?
No.
Okay, then I'm gonna put myself on mute, and Catherine, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Totally fine. So in fact, so our book was basically bringing together intersectional feminist theory as a way of thinking about sort of how can we make data science practices more just and work towards social justice. And so one of the key tenets of data feminism, we actually proposed these 7 principles, and each chapter in data feminism is one of these principles. And actually one of the principles is embrace pluralism, following from this like sort of feminist ideas of knowledge production from Donna Haraway, Sandra Harding, and many more folks that, you know, we pool our knowledge together, and it's by bringing many stakeholders to the table with diverse backgrounds that we get the most robust knowledge. And that is the sort of premise of feminist objectivity. And so we published the first version in November, I think, of 2018 for community review. And that's what you're looking at here, I think, right? Yeah, this is the community review site. And then it was open. So like it was open for people to comment, just basically to like the general public. And then we also structured with MIT Press and their support, like structured also kind of a slightly more structured peer review system. So we did have anonymous peer reviewers for the book separately. And then we also actually worked with the press to have individual peer reviewers for each chapter of data feminism. And we had a number of those. I think we had like 3 people per chapter. And it was amazing. Like it was a really interesting process where people gave us all sorts of feedback. Like some folks went in and like corrected our spelling and grammar, which is nice, you know. And then some folks came in and gave us really substantive comments. Other folks came in and gave us very generous critiques that were very legitimate. And then one of the interesting things too that like you actually can't see on the platform is that sometimes people didn't feel comfortable commenting publicly, but they would send us these long emails with their comments separately. And we actually have a whole document where we saved those. And it's like 10 people or something that did something like that. So like really substantive feedback, which they, for whatever reason, like didn't feel comfortable saying publicly. And then there was even one friend of ours who printed out the whole PubPub community review manuscript on paper. And then he was riding on a train, and then he annotated the whole thing, and then like came to my office one day and was like, here you go. Like I made the comments for you. And so that was another way that we received feedback. And so I think like the process overall, I think was incredible, and also just made the revision process with all of the feedback. I would just say the revision process was kind of tricky in terms of integrating so much feedback from so many people. But this was the first book that I've written. So Lauren, I don't know how that compares. Like, I don't know how, if our revision process was like much longer than what it would normally be because we got so much feedback. Do you have a sense of that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, in a way, it made me feel better because one thing I'll say about this book versus the other books that I've either written or edited is that we wrote this book so quickly. I mean, we had a 1-year ACLS grant. So we knew if we did not, where we were, both of us were not teaching, and we knew that if we did not finish the draft in a year, it would not get done. And my other book literally took me 10 years. And so I think that even though we got a ton of feedback, it actually was a lot more reassuring to me to know that we had so many eyes on it, because we didn't have the luxury of the sort of perspective that comes from time away from the project in the way that I think that you get from other books. And I would say that, I don't know how you feel, Catherine. I mean, there are definitely, there were definitely comments that made sense or were spot on, and we were either easy or hard to implement. There were very few that we had to sort of work through. But even that process I found very instructive. There were some comments that we either sort of didn't quite understand, and we ended up in many cases reaching out to the person and saying, could we talk to you a little bit more about this? There were some comments where we sort of understood the perspective, but didn't necessarily agree. And then the question became, how do we acknowledge the concern while sort of maintaining our own perspective or opinion of how we should frame things. But all in all, I feel like, this was just, Kathleen Fitzpatrick has this book called Generous Thinking. And to me, this was just such a embodied instance of the generosity of open scholarship in a way that, it far exceeded my expectations. And actually, I had past experience with open scholarly publishing and even open peer review before, but I had never been part of a process that involved this many people giving this many substantive comments on issues that I think were exceptionally sensitive and fraught, both politically and personally. And so the combination of that was just really it was amazing. It was really, really amazing.
I'll interject here to say that this is by far the most successful example we have on the platform that we know of open review. And I think it's really a reflection, Lauren and Catherine, of the careful way that you really framed why you were doing this, what you thought you could get out of it. These few paragraphs here, I think, went a really long way in encouraging people to actually engage in this. And you guys also went in there and you replied to comments, and it was clear that you were actually going to use this feedback to improve your manuscript, your revisions. And I think that really encouraged people to participate. Getting people to actually comment and engage on PubPub is one of our hardest our hardest challenges to overcome, both I think in the way that we're building the UI of the platform to encourage that behavior, but also just a cultural shift. We hear from people that they feel shy, who are they to comment on this person's work, which I think also speaks to maybe the emails that you received more privately. But yeah, this all went really, really well, and it was great to see that it could happen if done well.
I will just say one thing that I think we probably should make clear, and I think part of the, I think this is important to know, is that we did offer certain of the commenters something in return, yes. So MIT Press agreed to give copies of the book to the people who we wrote to and asked to comment on a particular chapter. And I think that that is part of the reason that sort of helped seed the conversation, right? Because no one really wants to be the first commenter. But I also think that's really important in a lot of these open projects where, you know, people's expertise and knowledge is valuable and their time is valuable, and sort of the if you build it, they will come kind of model is great in an ideal world. But you know, I think it is important to sort of speak to the real constraints. I mean, both sort of the real constraints of people's time, but also to recognize that offering feedback and peer review, like, is really, you're asking people to give of themselves. And so that was something that was really important to me, that we try to do. And it was because of MIT Press and their own generosity that they were able to do that. And I do think that played a pretty big, I mean, maybe not. We might have gotten some comments, but I do feel like it contributed to the success of the peer review.
I think that's right. I think, you know, seeing other comments in there is the best way to encourage other people to comment themselves. So, you know, even when we're talking to individual researchers who want to publish, you know, a chapter or journal article, we say, if there's a friend or a lab mate or, you know, an advisor that you can encourage to go in and leave a couple of comments, you're more likely to get other people to give you feedback as well. So I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just add to that, like the press definitely supported that by giving a copy of the book. But then I also think there's some something very meaningful in the fact that we extended those invitations to people personally too. And so it's like 3 people per chapter, more or less personally. So that's like 24, 25, 26 people personally that we were like communicating with. And I think there's also something different about being asked by somebody like a peer to comment on their work versus just like having someone tweet like, hey, my work is out there, anybody come. You know what I mean? Like I just know for me, like if somebody asks me, like if someone from my community asks me, hey, I value you and I value your opinion on my work, would you be willing to do this? I'd be like, yes, you know. And so I think there's something to, like that in the invitation and the way that it was extended and the fact that it was personal that also mattered in this case too, in terms of people responding. So
I think that's right. Yeah. And it sounds like you also approach them about specific chapters.
that's right. Yeah, we didn't say the whole book because we felt like that was too overwhelming of an ask. So.
Yeah, I think the targeted approach there is the right way. Yeah. Well, great. I'll also just note that the final version of the book also went on to PubPub as an open access title as part of the Strong Ideas series at the MIT Press, which is funded by the MIT Libraries. So lots of MIT support around there to get this book up. And yeah, any of you can read it. And there's a link here to other titles within this series as well. Anything else, Lauren and Catherine, before I move over to Jeff? All right. Jeff, I will move over to CFRP.
Actually, I was thinking I would share my screen because there's some other things that I want to show too. Would that be okay?
Of course, go for it.
All right, good. So hi, everybody. Let's see here. Okay. Yeah, so hello, everybody. I see Carl Jones on the call. Carl, it's really good to see you. I haven't seen you in a while. The PubPub publication that I'm going to talk about is based on a digital humanities project, which is called the Comédie Française Registers Project. And in order to make sense of what we did on PubPub, I want to very briefly show you some of the resources in this digital humanities project. So this project is based on the daily box office receipts for the Comédie Française Playhouse, which was the primary playhouse in Paris from 1680 until 1793, and it still exists today. Some of you may have been to see plays there. And so in this project, we did two things. First was we did high resolution digital images of these registers from the late 17th and 18th century. And so here you see an example. This is the box office receipts data for April 6, 1723. And then the other thing that we did was we extracted that data about ticket sales and put it in a relational database, and then created 2 or 3 search and visualization tools so that people could also explore that data and get a better sense of what was popular and what was profitable that was playing at the theater over these 113 seasons. And so just very quickly, for example, you can get a sense of the plays by Voltaire. He was a main author in the repertory during this period. And you get this detailed set of information about the different plays, and you can switch the alphabetical order or numerical order. And then down here, we include a little bar graph also, which tells you this is the daily receipts, how much Voltaire's plays were earning for the troupe over each of the various seasons. So that's just a little bit of background. And then I want to move to talk about the PubPub publication that we did. We did not, unlike Lauren and Catherine, have open peer review. We were working, as well as with Catherine, we were also working with an MIT Press acquisitions editor named Justin Kehoe. And so we did the more traditional thing of asking the MIT Press to commission reviews on the various essays. Although I like the open peer review process, and if we were to do this again, I think I'd definitely like to explore that. So I think there's just a couple of points that Catherine asked me to mention that I think are probably significant and useful for this conversation. The first is, I think the design of our publication is a little bit different than most PubPub designs, which tend to have boxes and images in them. I think we, my co-editor Sylvain Guillot and I, were more intent on thinking about a traditional print publication transferred to this online medium. There is no print book that goes with this. This publication is only available online, open access, and as Catherine mentioned, it's bilingual. So let me talk a little bit about the bilingual aspects. I'll just click here on this first essay. And one of the nice things that we have done is that you can also toggle very easily between the English and the French versions of the essays. And there are all the essays appear in both languages on the website. And so here you see the French version of our introduction as opposed to the English version of our introduction. Go back to the English. One of the things that we're just really excited about with this publication is that we were able to embed some of the tools that I was just showing you in the essays themselves. So I'll click, for example, on this essay by Juliette Cherboulier, which is a really wonderful essay in which she tries to imagine what's not present in the archive, particularly the sound. What did attending the theater sound like in this period? And so she starts off by just talking about how she was exploring the website, and we were able to actually embed one of the registers that you see here, and it's linked to the day that she's interested in, page 541. But then the reader can also sort of explore this register and go back and forth. One of the real benefits of this platform for us is that our readers will be able to move back and forth between the essays and the arguments that we're making, and then the tools themselves on the website to explore our conclusions. Let me just show you another quick example of that. This is the essay that I wrote, and my essay is about previous attempts to digitize this information when print technology was primary. And at the end of the essay, after talking about 3 earlier types of print versions of this data, we've embedded these tools, and this is the tool I was just showing you. Again, readers can sort of play around and explore this. I guess 2 other things I'll just say. One is that we are really excited. I just became aware yesterday of the stats for PubPub publications, and it's rather remarkable to see all of the places where this is being read and how widely it's being distributed in France. My co-editor and I are happy about that. But she also noted in an email today, we've got a reader in Mongolia too, which is pretty cool. And also, this is giving us a sense of which essays in the volume are being accessed more frequently. So that's a really wonderful feature of the PubPub platform. And then one of the dynamics in this volume is we are not only talking about French theater of the 18th century, but we're also talking about the digital humanities and how that changes the kinds of questions we ask about theater history and cultural history in France and more generally. And we were very aware as the result of the process that led to this online edition that you're seeing of the ephemerality and the difficulties involved in online publication. One of the things that happened, this was a 4-year process. We had conferences based on the project in 2015 and 2016, and then started commissioning the essays and editing them in 2016. And in 2018, in the summer, and Anne McCants, who is on the volume, knows about, who's on the call, knows about this too. She has an essay in this volume. In the summer of 2018, suddenly all of our online work disappeared. The MIT Press had commissioned an external vendor, and somehow somebody pulled the plug on the platform. There was no backup. So we had to reconstitute the whole volume. And that's when we came to Catherine and the PubPub team. And it's been a wonderful collaboration since that happened. But we also are really sensitive to and concerned about issues of long-term conservation of digital projects. This is not a print volume. It's not going to be on the shelves of any library. The MIT Press has agreed to keep this platform running. But we'll see how long that lasts. And I think this is an interesting question about these kinds of projects too. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen again, and I'll just show what those analytics actually look like a little bit on our back end. I won't do a full demo of PubPub today, though. If anyone would like one, I can, we'll set up another time to do that. But I'd rather use this time to go through examples of things you could do. But since Jeff mentioned the analytics, we have an impact tab here, and we actually have an impact tab for the site, each of the communities as a whole, as well as each chapter or article or conference proceeding, however, whatever you're using your PubPub community to do. So we can see here that it's had 11,000 page views, which is wonderful. You can see a timeline and some of the geographical representations, most in the US, some in Canada. Got a little bit of spread there, so that's nice. I'll also say that when the press first came to us with Jeff about putting this project on PubPub, we wanted nothing to do with it because it had already gone through so much trauma in the past. The last website that went down, we thought this is not going to be a fun group, but it ended up working out really, really well. And I'm glad.
Well, Sylvain and I were really fortunate that you agreed to take us on and give us a home. It's been a great collaboration.
Agreed. Okay, so then zooming out a little bit more, thank you, Jeff, Lauren. I know Catherine had to go, for kind of giving us your case studies. I think it would be nice to sort of define the spaces on PubPub a little bit more clearly. So PubPub itself is a platform. We're not a publisher. We get that question a lot. And anyone can create a community on PubPub at any time. You just click on this button. You do need an account. We don't sell your information or anything, but we do require a real email so that we minimize trolling and can have some sense of accountability on the platform. And we call each of the spaces, two of which you just saw, with Jeff and Lauren's projects, communities. And we purposefully use that kind of general vague word because we allow people to define what their spaces are for themselves. So for some groups, a community will be an entire monograph. For others, it'll be a publishing house that has all of their books and journals within their community. For others, it'll be an entire conference proceeding or event. So community for us is a vague term, purposefully so. And then you may have already overheard me use the word pub, which we kind of derive from our name PubPub, but it's also the term we use for this this element, right? So for data feminism, it's a chapter. For a journal, it would be an article, but on PubPub, a pub is basically like the smallest level of content that you can have. When you're in editing mode, it's looks, we didn't reinvent the wheel here. It looks just like Google Docs or Word. You have your normal editor. We do have some additional features like you can embed math equations. Don't worry, Lauren, none of this will stay in your book. You can embed math equations and edit them right in there. You can embed media, including iframes and interactives, videos, images, audio. You can add footnotes and citations. Right now, we just added today internal references, so you can link to images or figures or tables within your pub or your book. So we have some broader features that for me answers the question, how are you different from Medium? or insert other processor here. We also have the ability to design, so you'll see edit theme here. You can design your space, your pub. We can add DOIs to chapters or to entire books through the click of a button here. So we have, additional features that just really speak to the academic space that we're sort of catering to, and a lot of the requests that have come from our users. I think also in moving forward, I'd like to distinguish between two different uses of PubPub that I think are relevant to you. One you've seen already in, how can I publish my work on PubPub? Anyone can do it. You can create a community, and we cater to lots of different content types. The other is more how could I possibly use PubPub in my classroom, and what does that look like? So I think I'll use the rest of this half hour to talk a little bit more about both of those two things. And feel free to stop me and ask questions as I go, so that I'm not just talking at you. And I don't have a sense of how clear everything's coming through. So to the first part, I'll turn to my handy draft outline here. There are lots and lots and lots of ways that people can use PubPub. We actually don't have a complete understanding of all the communities on the site. There are over 3,000 of them at this point. Like I said, anyone can create one at any time. We really don't have a stronghold on how people use it. And that's by design. We love to just kind of wake up one day and see a new community that suddenly has launched this great new journal or something without our help. And that makes my day. So sometimes we don't really know what's going on. We don't have, insight into private communities. So a community that appears to be dead to us could actually have a lot going on in the background for its admins and its users. But we have kind of chunked out the different community types that we have the most interaction with and that we've seen so far. Those tend to be books, presses, journals, some preprints, conferences, and increasingly classrooms, especially now that everyone's going virtual. So I'll go over some of these, some examples of these. I won't go over all of them, but again, I'll circulate this page after the call and everyone can kind of click through as they're interested. The first is also a recent publication from earlier in October. It's called Phone and Spear, and it's a book published by Goldsmiths Press. This is the Goldsmiths. Actually, this book is on its own PubPub community because there were just so many different components of it. Usually, Goldsmiths publishes all of their books within their own community on PubPub. So Phone and Spear is a book that was put together by a group of researchers, mostly based in Australia and New Zealand, and they had lots of research and video and audio and images that they collected with their cell phones, just like on the ground, talking to different communities. The print design of the book was really important to them. So you'll see that unlike other books that you've already seen, you don't immediately get to text, you don't immediately get to clicks, to a chapter. Usually the primary focus is to get people to read as quickly as possible. But the authors here did not care about that at all, and instead said, no, we want the feeling of flipping through those earlier pages, those spread of images, and we want people to really dive into the experience of reading and getting into the content. So we have a bit of a different layout here, and yeah, we've put together lots of our different elements and design blocks that are possible on PubPub, which are limited but pretty flexible, to put together something that's, I think, pretty visually intriguing and something that they were ultimately happy with, which I'll just say I was concerned about at the outset, given how beautiful the book is. I'll note, and I don't know if I'll be able to find, let me see. I think this one has a video. We did replace some of these static images in some chapters with video. So the print and the PubPub versions are not exactly the same. Yeah, so here's one, and you'll see, these are like their iPhone captures. And it just, I bring this one up because it is just a different example of a book on the site that I encourage you to look at a little bit more. The other book I'll highlight, aside from the two that Jeff and Lauren and Catherine talked about, is Sustainability Science, which comes out of a group at the Harvard Kennedy School. They came to us over a year ago now, saying that they wanted to create kind of an evolving textbook that people could contribute to and add and revise together as the field evolved. So finally, I think it was in September, we got this up, and I think they're actually going to be putting up a few different books like this. The first is Sustainability Science. It's framed as a guide, and there are the initial makings of chapters here. But in general, people are invited to read it, to add to it, and it's thought of as this collaborative space, which again is something that we definitely are aiming to encourage through the UI and the culture around the platform. Any questions about those two or monographs in general? Okay. The other two that I will focus on before turning to classrooms is the Harvard Data Science Review, which is a journal. They are published by the MIT Press, but out of the Harvard Data Science Initiative, which if I don't say together, there's some lawyer that will come get me. And they have been publishing on PubPub for about, I guess, since last July. And they really wanted a way to ensure that the content that they published, if it was interactive, if there were data visualizations, could really match what their authors are going to want to communicate. So they went with PubPub. We partnered with them to further develop the platform for what they were needing, which is a model that works really well for us. oftentimes will partner with a group or a library or a press if they really want something or need something for a project that we think everyone else using the platform could also use. We'll often, partner and work together to build that. So for HDSR, they helped us kind of redesign our article page layout and a few other things that at this point none of you would notice, but I know. And they have their, they're pretty typical journal site here. Sometimes you'll see an article that has some data viz or an iframe embed or something like that. They just published their 2020 election section for their latest issue. So if you're curious what they predicted would happen, I recommend you come back here. One other I will look at is the Graduate Journal of Food Studies. I just wanted to throw in a student-run journal into the mix. There's also Projections, which is also run out of MIT's architecture school, but this one has really great images, so I like using it. They have, their little volume number tiles here. And this is one example of a community that we just saw on Twitter and realized that it was on PubPub. We had no idea that they were working on PubPub. And so we got in touch and found out more about what they were doing, and are, generally big supporters of what they're up to. So if I just click onto one to see. And I think these are also great examples in case you have students of your own who are, starting a thing or are working on, their theses or something like that. We have lots of dissertation drafts on PubPub and student-run journals, research groups, reading groups, study groups, and the privacy around those is up to the admins as well. I'll mention Africa Archive because they are the one preprint server that's on PubPub, as well as other, they use lots of other spaces. And we're working with them right now. This is an example of a partner we'll probably partner with to go out for some funding to incorporate some additional functions on PubPub that cater to African-based researchers, like other languages, having an offline ability to draft, even having donation buttons on here to help support their work. So this is an exciting new partner for us. Let's see. Okay, so then moving on to classroom use. I think earlier I had mentioned that, when I first started at PubPub, there were no books or journals or anything on the platform. I came on as a community manager, and at that point, that really meant creating a community at all. And that really started with Frankenbook. It was the first full-length title on PubPub, and we learned a lot from it. The first iteration of Frankenbook on the platform was an infinite scroll of the entire book, which was terrible. No one knew where they were. It was really hard to get a sense of a place, and it really didn't work very well. You'll notice that we're intentional about breaking out chapters, even if the design of that varies. We have a chapterized way of doing things on the site. And Frankenbook I bring up because the editors were very focused on making sure that the open access edition could be used in classrooms. They really wanted to make sure that students wouldn't have to buy their book if they were studying Frankenstein, which is one of the most assigned novels in the United States. They worked again with us very closely in building out features that would make sure that was possible. And they're actually working with the MIT Press on creating a series of books in this vein, open access, so that other students could use them in classrooms based on what are the top assigned books in the United States. So we're really excited to see that eventually up on the platform. But in order to, in order to actually get Frankenstein working for students, we work directly with a bunch of professors at Arizona State, where the editors of Frankenstein, or we call it Frankenbook, are based, and then some who just reach out to us and said, hey, I want to use this in my class. How do I do that? And we're like, well, we're figuring that out. Why don't we work together? And we sort of walk through it with them. So you'll see initially during the first year, professors would just send out the link to Frankenstein, and we noticed that some students were annotating. Now, of course, let's see if I can find examples. We noticed that some students were clearly annotating with a prompt in mind, and we thought, well, it would be a lot better if we could give classes their own actual spaces to do this and give students some privacy. So they're actually, well, this is one of the editors. Let's see if I can find. I won't waste your time with me trying to find a student annotation, but we thought, well, let's give students their own spaces, or classes their own spaces that could also, toggle privacy, and and then they can talk to each other. The professors could seed their own annotations or questions within the text. And it could work, more cohesively for a class than if you just throw them all in with everybody else's public comments. So we're still in the process of doing that. Right now, we have a few, test. Let me see if I can find some of the communities. We have a few test communities out there, and they're at the end of the semester. We're going to have a little bit of a summit. We're going to collect feedback from people, see what worked, what didn't, and again, go out for a grant to make this more friendly and build out the features that we'll need in order to make this just, something that's automatically very easy for professors to do for books that are already on PubPub. And now I'm not gonna, we hid them too well, so I'm not gonna be able to find it. But I'll find it later, and I'll make sure that I include at least one of them in the link that I circulate after this. The other last one before we get to questions, the other book I'll mention is Topology. It's a math textbook from the MIT Press that we published also at the end of the summer. The professor that we spoke to was very suspicious of us. And by the end of the call, he not only wanted his book on PubPub, but he also wanted to run his class on PubPub. And so I bring this up because if any of you guys were to come to this site, you wouldn't be able to see what I see. You would just see welcome, and you wouldn't see any of these pages. We set it up for the professor so that he could invite his class to create PubPub accounts. He'd make that, he'd invite them and give them permission to see their page. And then he basically would publish assignments that the students could comment on and basically learn from. And so this is their, interactive space that he's been using throughout the semester. So he's not using Frankenbook, but he'll be invited to our little summit later this year. And, so far it's been working for him. I set up this other private page for him that, I guess, I don't know if he's been using it, but in case he wanted to basically work on drafts without his students seeing them, they could live on this page and he can move them over to the fall 2020 page. So we're working on different models. It's a really flexible platform. So depending on how you operate your class, or how, whatever structure works for you or your students, or even the subject or department, we've been able to figure out ways to creatively kind of make PubPub work for different things. I know I skipped over a bunch of other examples, but any questions so far?
Catherine, do you have a sense of what additional features people have asked for so far? I mean, it looks amazing, and the amount of variety and the flexibility is really striking. But in the classroom context, people could have specific needs. I wonder if you came across a few of those.
Yeah. Yeah, the asks always burn more brightly than things we already have. So the things that we get asked for a lot have to do with managing specific annotations. So we found that some professors want to be able to see and grade or at least mark the existence of a specific student's annotations before other students can see them. And I don't know if that's, they don't want students influencing their responses or something, but they have asked us for an additional level of control over what student annotations are visible to different students at different times. And right now we basically have like private or public. So, if you're part of a student group on PubPub, to us, it sort of just means that you're part of this collaborative community, and we don't have privacy kind of within or between students. So we're still figuring out how to make that work. Another thing that we've been asked for is single sign-in. So there's fatigue on students' part of there just being so many tools. They have their Blackboard, or I forget what the big one is called, and then all these other now Zoom, and they really want to be able to use, say, their MIT login or their Blackboard login in order to use PubPub. So we're thinking about that. To us, it's more of a privacy concern, and we have pretty strict terms. So we're still kind of weighing for ourselves the gains and losses of doing something like that. But I would say those are the two biggest asks. I'm curious, to hear from the group if there would be big asks or needs that you've experienced that we might want to consider.
Yeah, I was going to ask Catherine, I'm really intrigued by this topology class, although it seems like the professor is using it primarily as a course management system and to put up materials, as well as the annotation that you talked about. But I'm wondering if you have had other examples of professors using this as a place where students can post projects that they may have had assigned to them. And I'm wondering, the only other tool like that I'm familiar with, I'm sure there's many out there, is Omeka. And I'm wondering how you think PubPub compares to Omeka in that sense, as well as if you have any examples of professors using the PubPub platform that way.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We do. So there used to be, from Duke University Press, a student-run journal that was really just for a year. It seemed like a small group of students had signed on to a 2-semester-long seminar class that would walk them through what it was like to publish scholarly work. And they created their own journal, and they were publishing their own pieces through that course, which they then took down after it was over. Another course, and I'm forgetting what it's called, otherwise I would look it up, but Joey Ito used to run a class at the MIT Media Lab where he'd have all of his students keep diaries, and those diaries were PubPub, were on PubPub. So they would work on their drafts in private, post them publicly for the class to see, and keeping and maintaining their kind of like diary throughout the semester was part of their grade. And I think they were also required to read and comment on their peers' work as well. And I can include, once I find it, I can include a link to that as an example too.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Have you had any issues with people working with the styling or the layout part of the system? Any needs there?
There's always a need. So, you know, there's always, so we have a good amount of flexibility, but we also want to prioritize readability. So we don't let people do a lot of stuff just because it's just not good practice, even though it looks cool. So we're not necessarily always like the shiniest or the most interesting like designed book, but we are consistently readable. We are consistently working well on mobile and other types of screens. And so we've sort of kind of landed on the more conservative end of that spectrum. That said, we do have HTML blocks in our page design that you can use to manipulate the PubPub design. So let me find it. Sonic Scope is a journal. It's a student-run journal out of Goldsmiths University, and they hired a summer intern to come in and like recode their PubPub community. And so you'll see that, you know, it's not like the typical like banner. They have the dual column. So it is possible if you have, you know, the funding or you want to pay our team to do something like this for you. But out of the box, we have like some kind of guidelines there that we keep people within. I think,
Right.
you know, for the most part, in terms of designing the site, people are normally happy. I think sometimes they want the articles to have the more scholarly looking dual column or, you know, things like that, that tend to be pretty standard in different fields that like we just aren't going to do.
Right, because that can be sometimes one of the things that gets a little constraining with Omega, for example, how flexible or lack of flexibility in terms
Yeah.
of getting the pages to look kind of like you want. But it seems like you've done a really good job with the system. What I see there, it seems really exciting and interesting. Even if you
Thanks.
call it conventional, it still looks
Right, right. I
I
think, you know, I'm just trying to find, like, again, it's readable. It looks clean. There's space. Like those are the main things, you know, and we tweak things around the edges mostly. And you know, we work closely with you know, making sure that we're reviewed well for accessibility. And so that's always kind of our number one priority. That said, you know, that we take a lot of feedback on all of this stuff, on, you know, the organization of this information and what you need to know, and when. So if you expand this, there's further details about, you know, contributors and dates published and updated and citation options and so on. And there's a lot of, I think, there's a lot of flexibility here on our part around things like that.
I can just attest to that. We were incredibly picky about design, and Catherine was endlessly patient with us about all of that.
So I know that we're at the half hour or the hour, but just to close, I'll say that again, I'll circulate all of these links and more, so that, you know, you can look at that over. I'll repeat that anyone can create a community at any time for free. This is all sort of baked in PubPub stuff. So I highly recommend just like creating a community and playing around with it. I always, you know, no matter who the partner is that we're talking to, I always recommend that they do that. And I'll also say that we have a help community that we're in the process of growing. So I am the voice of PubPub Help. We're adding videos monthly. We're, you know, adding guides. So this is a good and will be a better resource to use if you do decide to use it and need help. Another thing that I note in my outline that again I will circulate is that we have a help email address that you can use to reach any of us, and on that I also include my own email address.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. This is fascinating. Catherine, Lauren, Jeff, and everyone else for being here. I'm so glad we recorded this because I'm sure there'll be more folks coming in and learning the bounty of PubPub and all the kinds of cool things folks can do on it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for joining me. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you all so much. Thank you.